There he is. Where are you at? I don't know if you can unmute yourself. Harry, you can't talk. We don't have a moderator? We should.
Yes, sorry, I just got online.
Oh,
Hi, this
okay.
is Angela.
All right. Yeah, because I was worried about
There I
that.
am.
There you are. I was just
No.
saying that you look like you're to seat to heaven with
I had a moment of no
yeah.
self.
Yeah, sorry. So we can get started. Welcome to today's Dharma talk. So we will start by reciting the three refugees, and let me start. I'll share my screen.
All right. Join palms. Bow. I vow to deliver innumerable sentient beings. I vow to cut off endless fixations. I vow to master limitless approaches to Dharma. I vow to attain supreme Buddhahood. Okay, good morning to you all. I'm kind of curious to see if people had heard the previous lecture on just right before this one in the Chinese. I think it was on the Salisamba Sutra, but I may be referring to that as well. Very interesting how paths cross with respect to that. This class is going to be about Mahayana, the early development of it, the theory and history of how the Mahayana developed. Mahayana practice at this point in time is the largest of all of the Buddhist sects, if you would call them that, from Theravadan to Vajrayana and Mahayana. But Vajrayana is also Mahayana. It just has a little bit different way of practicing, but all of that is still Mahayana. And it's very interesting because historically, as we begin to practice, then we begin to wonder, well, where did this all come from? And then what is Mahayana versus Hinayana? Some of you know this. I'd probably say the majority of you know the differences, but it is something that is an interesting one because it wasn't like all of a sudden there's Mahayana versus Hinayana. All of these things were developments. The same way with Chan. Chan was something that slowly developed, and we'll get to that also in terms of the history of how all these different schools interacted with it, and to develop it. It's very, very difficult to talk about these developments because there was so many schools, so many sects in the very beginning, whether we're talking about the first council or the second council or a third council of different times when Buddhists got together in terms of that. And there's not any agreement of Buddhologists. In Buddhologists, I would lump in people who are religious scholars and historical scholars, philosophical scholars, all these different people that looked at this, and there's not really an agreement as to what was being done, even whether, for instance, a first council was done, or a second council, and who was there and how many people or what type of sects were there. All of these things are subject to evaluation and interpretation depending on who you talk to, and the Theravadins will give it a particular spin. Scholars will give it another spin in terms of what was being discussed, what were the differences. What we know is that these kind of markings of these different councils that came together that after the death of Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, and then we're discussing what he talked about. We know at that point that it had to be committed to memory. So you have people that remember one part, another person remembers another part. So Buddhism was a very interesting thing because it developed in a way that it required a great responsibility of the Sangha to preserve it. But it's something that has to be preserved not only in in literature, sutras or sastras, um, the Tripitaka, all of those things had to be passed on, but also had to have the heart. So it wasn't just simply some scripture that one reads or one recites. It is something that has to come from the heart. And here is where Mahayana was beginning to come in, because there was the let's say the written scriptures little by little began to come to China, but these scriptures were there in India. But as they began to come in, the Chinese began to look at it, and there was what is called a sinification of the Dharma. Sinification means a kind of a Chinese spin on the Dharma, which it began to influence, and more influence than buck heads with Confucianism and Taoism at that time, which were the prevalent schools that were being studied in China. But Buddhism just added a little bit of a different layer. And if you wanted to kind of, in a very gross comparison of Confucianism and Buddhism, was that the Confucians wanted to perfect the person, and the Buddhists wanted to go to the already perfected mind. And so there was a little bit of a difference there, but this difference is made very, very clear in terms of the scriptures that were arriving, that no, it's not simply a perfection of a person, because the Indian Buddhist clergy and scholars at that time had already gone through that with the existing religions in India at that time, and in the Vedic traditions, and had gone and said, no, it's beyond this idea of a perfected self. It's one that one has to realize the perfected mind, or I should say, rather, realize that the mind is already perfected, and then there is at this point um, a self-absorption. The self-absorption is the absorption of all phenomena returning back in, or the realization that it has never left the mind. And this is a very, very important part. So all of that progressed to the point of the study of emptiness, sunyata, and this was the big diverging point in terms of the study. And we'll get into talking about how the Heart Sutra played a very, very important role on this, and the Prajna Paramita Sutras in detail, making this change and making this announcement that this is the doctrine that one should follow, and then why all the players were there with respect to that. So we're going to talk about that as well, to see where this went to, all the way to when we get into the Tathagata Garba Sutras. Now, the Tathagata Garba Sutras are sutras that, for instance, Queen Shamala's Lion's Roar Sutra, the Uttara Tantra Sutra. These sutras are sutras that go beyond the idea of emptiness, and which is where Nagarjuna, who was a main proponent of the Madhyamika school, left us with these two truths of apparent reality and absolute reality, but didn't weigh in on saying, is any of these real, other than just to say they're empty. And the Tathagata Garba Sutras and the proponents of that waded in, and at the risk of appearing to be that there might be a monistic aspect to this type of a doctrinal approach. Monistic meaning that there's some supreme being, whether it's an individual or whatever, but it appears to be something that there's monistic, but that would be in contravention to the actual scriptures of the Buddhist or the Buddha. And at that point, we look at this and we say that it's something beyond that. It goes beyond a conceptual interpretation. The problem is that when we read, especially modern day scholars, and they point their finger and say, look, right here, they're now going and they're saying that Buddhism is there's a supreme being or whatever that's monistic. And we say, no, it isn't that way. And this in the Mahaprajna Paramita Sutra, the Buddha made this very, very, very clear in terms of going through it and explaining that all of this was just simply appearances. Now, where do the appearances come from? Scholars will say, that is monistic. That's the supreme being. But no, it isn't in this way. One cannot approach it from this viewpoint that there is something there. And so sometimes when I'm writing to people, I say that everything is self-nature of mind without the is. Because even if we say that is this tiny little microbe trying to describe the body, which it has not ever gone to. Let's say the microbe was in the small toe. It could not know the whole body. So we cannot know the Buddha mind from being a microbe. There has to be a transcendence there. And when there's that transcendence, then that little microbe constitutes the entire universe that we're in and beyond. It has access to the entire body. And that is the transcendence here. Using it with the analogy of a body, what we're doing is we're saying, no, this way is where we go with all of this. It's something that we have to be able to see. Now, in the one sutra I mentioned to you is very interesting. Salisamba Sutra. I don't know what it is in Chinese. It's referred to as the Reichstag or Sapling Sutra. I don't know if any of you have ever read that before. It's one that's being approached or taught by the monastic and CMC right before my lecture. But it's very, very interesting because that sutra, this Reichstag seed and stalk sutra, is talking about, well, if there's a seed, then is that real? And then we get to the stalk. And does the stalk, once there's the rice stalk, then does the seed disappear? And then it gives rise to another rice seed. And so, but we cannot negate either one of them, but we cannot prove either one of them to have self-existence. So it's running directly into Pratika Samapada, cause and condition never fail. Now this sutra is very important. So I'm very happy that it's being talked about because it was a very early sutra, and I think about 100 BC. And in this time period, they're talking about Pratika Samapada. They're not quite talking about Buddha nature at this point, but they're kind of circling around, let's say, the drain of samsara, and almost ready to drop down into what we refer to as the void of the idea of this transcendence. But they're all pointing, the fingers are now pointing to that there is this wisdom, And this wisdom is pratika samappada, the causes and conditions never fail. Everything is connected in this way. So it's a very interesting thing when we begin to look at early parts of Buddhism. And that's why I said this is a very interesting sutra, because it talks about cause and effect. The beginning of Mahayana, just the very beginning, what I would call proto Mahayana teaching. It wasn't saying, oh, we're Mahayanas and this is what we're doing. It wasn't in this way. It was, all right, this is how the mind works. And so this is very, very important, because when we look at it and we see, oh, this is how the mind works, then we begin to understand a little bit more about how this practice is. But by understanding this part, it enables us to move forward in terms of analysis. All of this took several hundred years of refinement, of disagreements. There were so many splinter groups of Buddhists, and there's these charts that show how many groups of Buddhists there are. Nobody can agree on it. I'll kind of give you an example, see if I can find it. Nobody can agree on how many groups were of Buddhists were there, and it all depends on whether you're looking at a Theravadan chart or a scholar chart or a Mahayana chart. Let me see if I just got to give you an example. Let me see if you can see. Hold on. These are different schools that follow. I understand this is not the best way to show you, but to give you an example. But then we get down further, and then there's another list of schools from somebody else. And so these schools are something that nobody agrees upon. And the reason I'm telling you this is so that you realize, in terms of these are different schools, and then the bold lettering is somebody else's listings of schools. As we go through it, there's another bold one. This is another person's list of schools that we're going through. And it all depends on who you look at in terms of where these schools were at. But there was just these minute differences in the schools. And even if we look at Theravadan and Mahayana, there's really, the division there is in the consciousness and not in the heart. The heart sees it the same way. Consciousness says, no, our school is the one that is superior. So this battle between the Hinayana and Mahayana began early in terms of interpretations of certain points. And those points were in some ways material, but they didn't represent a creation of a separate Dharma as much as a progression of the study of the Dharma that was already there, was already in the Theravada Nikayas. Now, the term yana means vehicle. And so when we talk about Hinayana, we're talking about lesser vehicle. And Maha, anytime you see the word Maha before something, then that means that it is the highest vehicle. And so if you ever played the game where you decide who's going to bat first in a baseball game, in a sandlot game, you'd throw up a bat and you'd catch it. And then another person would put their fist there, and the next one would put their fist there. And you just keep going until somebody can cap the top of it. And that was the winner. Well, Theravada and Mahayana kept doing this throughout the time period. And so the Theravadan school developed the Abhidharma. Now, the term Abhi means highest. And so if we know what the Dharma means, the highest teachings, then this was where everything began to really get beyond simply parables and stories that were in the Nikayas and these little things that were happening that the Buddha was interpreting or coming in and saying, no, it's this instead. all of a sudden you've got the Theravadins going, wow, they threw out the Abhidharma, saying that this is something that is that we should really look at. And it is a heck of scriptures in terms of understanding how mind works. So this is something very important. And so we'll talk about that in a moment. I'm kind of wondering how much time I'll have today to go over some of these subjects, but what I'm kind of giving you right now is an overture of what I'm going to be talking about for the next few weeks, so that you have an idea of where we're going, and giving you kind of an overview of what was happening during this time period. One is historically, and then two, doctrinally, and then the third is practice. So what we want to do is give you an opening, but not try to put you in so deep into one particular aspect that you're not going to be able to get a whole picture of it. This is what I want you to do, is I want you to have a better idea of what Buddha Dharma is, and in particular, Mahayana and Prajna Paramita, because Prajna Paramita is literally at the heart of Mahayana. And so it's something that's very incredible. But as we begin to practice, you may get an aha moment in terms of, in your practice, in your realization, where this was going. And so it will give you an ability to see things a little bit different than you had seen them before. Now, I've got my notes and that I've written, and then I've got like 3 different piles of stuff that are all topics that I want to talk to you about. But I want to kind of stay with my notes for a little bit. The term Prajna Paramita is a very, very interesting term. Let me see if I can find it in this book. We refer to Prajna as wisdom. And this term Prajna, the first term, P-R-A, pra, means before. And the jna means to know. So it's before knowing. Now, some of you have heard of the Huato. What is my original face before I was born? And so this is where you look. This is the wisdom. Before the knowledge, there is the gnosis, or the realization. This is the wisdom that we're going for. Now, this wisdom is very interesting because there's 3 types of wisdom. There's this kind of worldly wisdom that everything is connected. And then there's a second type of wisdom that says everything is impermanent. And the third one goes beyond this. And that is this, what we call transcendent wisdom. This is what the Buddha taught. To teach only the first 2 will not deliver anyone. It is the exploration of the transcendent wisdom that gets us there. That is before knowing what is there, before the word, the Huato, what is there. It all fits perfectly in terms of what we're doing. When we're looking at a Huato, and you know the term in Chinese means before the word. This is before anything, before conceptualization, before conditioning, what is there. This is the word wisdom. If you understand that, then you know which side of the broom to hold on to. You don't hold on to the side with all of the straw. You turn it around and use it in the proper way. And then you just sweep with it. But it will work in this way. But it is this transcendence that goes beyond what we're doing. And in fact, every time I talk about this, it's like it wants to tease me into pulling you into the Heart Sutra. And I'm resisting that because it's so easy for me to pull you into the Heart Sutra, because once I say that, some of you go, oh, go beyond. you know, even gate para samgate, you know, go to the other shore. Indeed, this transcendent wisdom. Shoot for a moment. This is what Suzuki referred to as the beginner's mind. This mind that isn't presupposing anything, any kind of a condition that's there. So it's a very interesting way of looking at this. I'll go back to my notes. And so when we refer to Prajna Paramita or Maha Prajna Paramita, remember Maha meaning highest. Some of you know this, some of you don't. And so those of you who don't, this is why I'm giving you this. And some of you, it's just a refresher of this. But when we talk about that, it's very good, because when you begin to start reading for yourself and sutras and commentaries on sutras, you'll see these words and you'll know what they mean. Just like the term an, if you see that before a word, it means the opposite, an-atman, meaning no self, where atman means self. So it's just kind of these little prefixes that are added to things, or suffixes that are added in terms of this. It's interesting too, because the term, when we look at this paramita, the ITA aspect of it is actually feminine, kind of like in the Spanish language. So it's, and I don't know if there's a paramito, but that's kind of making me hungry now. But the ITA is feminine, which is very interesting, because when we start looking at this, and here I'm going back into the Heart Sutra for a moment, but I'll lace the Heart Sutra into all of this, because it's the crux of where Mahayana really got its momentum. So when we see this, initially, some of the earliest versions of the Heart Sutra, it was the Buddha that was talking to Sariputra. But that changed to Avalokitesvara Kuan Yin Pusa, the Kuan Yin Bodhisattva. I'm speaking in 3 languages now. But I want you to see this, that all of a sudden, and then we say, well, what sex is Avalokitesvara? It's really asexual. But it's known in the signification in part as feminine in some features of the Kuan Yin Bodhisattva. So it's a very interesting way in terms of how this is explained. And it's very interesting because I don't know if Anyi's here or not, but in the Buddhist artwork, there shouldn't be a depiction of Kuan Yin Bodhisattva like a woman or like a man. It is kind of in between, and the expression of the artist of that is very, very important in terms of when one has a picture that's there. You have to see it in a way in which it doesn't attract you one way or another, other than the compassion that's there. And then again, this is leading right into the essence of the Heart Sutra, and how it was working. But originally, the Heart Sutra was not known as the Heart Sutra. It was known as the Prajna Paramita Sutra, this perfection of wisdom. But it was added. They changed the term, especially in China, to being this Heart Sutra. But it was also in concert with certain Theravadan texts, which used a very similar term in Sanskrit to describe things, and saying, remember, we're talking about this, and now it's going, no, this is really the heart, not this here. This is a heart. So the the Theravadins were approaching this and using their nuclear bomb, which was the Abhidharma, because the Nikayas weren't going to get them there. The Nikayas are all these stories of things, parables and similes and things, metaphors that were there to talk to you about how to practice and how to do this, but they needed something meatier. And so it was developed as the Abhidharma, and it is really, really good. One of the last instructions Master Shen Yang gave to me is, he said, Gilbert, study the Abhidharma. I'm going like, okay, sure. You know, I know the name. I just don't know anything else about it. So I really poured into it and read it many, many times. Just kept going over it and over it, because it's not easy to understand it. It's not easy to say, where are they going with all of this? Especially if you're just a novice. You know, to me, even though I'd been studying and doing things, I really considered myself a novice in terms of Buddhist theories, higher theories and training. And when you go into it, then you start realizing, wow, this took a lot of time. And it was like somebody who's thinking and going, oh, I just had this thought. This thought came from this, and this thought will lead to all these different things. And all of these things until they finally honed a system of a description of all these types of appearing passions and emotional states that arise and how they affect the general environment. And so they're saying, if this happens, this and this will happen, which is a training of the mind. It's very, very powerful. I understand why Shifu told me to do that, because at that point I had been studying the Yogacara system, and the Yogacara equally has a very complex system of how mind works. And so it helps you understand, because what it does is it pulls you away from the thought process and enables you to see these things and how they were arising. And then your laboratory is, when you finish reading that, then when you are sitting to meditate, you see these things arising. So you're not dissuaded, you don't have a delusion about them. When you get up off your cushion and you interact with people, you know what's the likelihood of things happening, because you already know the map. It's like, I have a map of the mind, and I'm looking at it. Let me see. Oh, okay. If this person does this, this will happen, and this will happen. And so it's taking pratika samapada, cause and condition never fail, and then cutting it up and saying, oh, these are different things that can happen. If this one happens, then this one will happen, or likelihood it's going to happen. All of these things were very interesting, but very, very deep. But as one begins to see that, it is this kind of removal from the appearances here that enables one to be able to see the appearances in a unbiased, undiscriminating way. So it's very, very good. The main proponent of that was Sariputra. And so Sariputra made the advancement in the Abhidharma that everything is real. And on our part, coming in with the Heart Sutra, all of a sudden that changes. But the reality is it wasn't like a novice or a totally ignorant way of looking at things. It was just saying that everything is connected together. And they use the example of Indra's net. So the queen, this Indra, and talking about this net that had reflecting surfaces at every convergence points of the net, so that each one reflected to another reflecting surface on it what was happening. So it was, oh, well, then the little microbe in the small toe knows what's happening to the microbe up on the top of the head, because it's all interconnected. And because of this, then they state everything is real. Why? Because it's all mind. And so what it happens there is that it looks really good. And that was their, as their cornerstone. And they're saying, this is it. This is it. And they go to put this on top to cap it. But the Mahayanas come back and they go, no, Sariputra, form is not other than emptiness. Emptiness is not other than form. Boom, they took the whole game away. They made everything disappear. Bam, just like that, then there's no reality or unreality. And this goes all the way back where the Madhyamika school, the middle school, is talking about this and saying, from Nagarjuna's point, everything is empty. So at this point, then they changed the playing surface. They changed the game and the rules, saying none of this in the samsaric world can describe, can pinpoint, can say this is real and this is not real. This is very important. But when you look in the Heart Sutra, then you see that in the Heart Sutra, it talks about that this is real. This is not false. And it isn't the doctrine that they're talking about, because that would be contradictory, wouldn't it be? You say, no, you're here, and then it's a double cap. If you did that, you're saying, no, you guys are wrong because only this is right. It would not work. It would not work. So what is it that the Mahayanas are looking at? This is the part that's very, very important. It's the key to this, because as we're looking at this and we're seeing what the Mahayanas are looking at, it's transcendent. Not the words in the Heart Sutra. It is the product that comes from this. Gate, para samgate, go to the other shore, bodhisattva. So it's saying, go. It is not the words, it's beyond them. And if you try to interpret the Heart Sutra in a way, just simply from the conceptual aspects of it, you only get the skin of the Dharma. A full transcendence, one could get the marrow of the Dharma, beyond the bone, beyond the muscles, beyond the sinew, whatever, right straight to the heart of it. But the heart of it is that the words are meaningless. It is the heart that is important, this transcendence, this ability to be able to see beyond the words, it into this absorption of the mind. So there I go. I got sucked right back into the Heart Sutra again, even though I haven't really arrived there yet. There's so many different chapters ahead of it, but I guess I'm going to use the Heart Sutra as this pivotal point in Mahayana. So when we get there, when we were talking about the Salisamba Sutra, this sutra, when it came out, it was very interesting. It could not be, it cannot be called Mahayanas, but like I mentioned, it was proto-Mahayanas. This was around 200 BC, so 300 years after the death of the Buddha, this sutra comes out, emphasizing that causes and conditions never fail. But this is a very important aspect, because up to this point, again, the Nikayas were just simply metaphors and similes and small stories. And here there begins to be a systematic approach to understanding how mind works. And when I talk about mind, please don't confuse it with consciousness. Consciousness is one of those little tiny microbes. What we're doing is we're saying this consciousness cannot describe this, but we're using, again, a parable of the rice seed and rice stalk, but going much further into it in terms of seeing a very systematic system. So again, this was a prototype of the Mahayana teachings. And I was talking on my Monday night class and talked about this word here, Vaipula. Now, Vaipulya, excuse me. Vaipulya is a Sanskrit word that means that it is complete. It is thorough. Whatever it is this system that we are looking at. Now, this Vaipula refers to there was about 9 Mahayana sutras. And what it was saying that each one of those sutras was a complete system. It wasn't one parable, one metaphor, or anything. If you studied it, for instance, Lankavatara, Lotus Sutra, no. If you studied those sutras, you would be able to reach the heart of the practice. Although they came from different viewpoints, they were still all pointing to the essence of mind, to the nature of the mind. And this was important to see this, that there was, because all of these were there. Again, they were just like this little sutraette, the Heart Sutra, that the answer is beyond the words that are written on the page. The answer is something that's much deeper. And in this way, when we look at things, we see them very, very clearly, that all of these things, their appearances connected with pratika samappada, causes and conditions. But as one looks at that, there was an absorption, that mind absorbs you, not the other way around. That's the problem. That was the problem in the Abhidharma. That was a problem with the Theravadins in terms of how they were looking at it. This perfection was almost approaching the same thing as Taoism or Confucianism, but it wasn't in particularly pointing at this transcendence in a direct way. Although the Theravadins still have the idea of a transcendence to the idea of nirvana, Mahayana say that there is no suffering, there's no attainment. And you go, what? Because it's a total negation. You cannot have an attainment and say there's no suffering. It doesn't work in this way because it transcends the concepts, the words written on the page. One, and the exhortation is go to the other shore. It's the exhortation of going beyond that not speaking to what appears to be a personality, an ego or a life in being, but the Buddha mind within all sentient beings. So there's this inherent nature of the Buddha mind. This then was the opening to the Tathagata Garba Sutras, this self-nature of mind that all beings possess, rather than this idea that something separate. It had to be this way. It had to be this way simply because if we didn't do that, what would happen would be that there would be people outside of the ability to be enlightened, let's say, but that would negate the whole premise of the self nature of mind, which means that it is connected completely. Even if we go back to the 200 BC and the Salisamba Sutra, the Reichstag Sutra, this is the same. It's saying everything is connected, but there is this perfection of wisdom saying the Buddha, he left these parts out. It was difficult because upon the Buddha's um, realizations, major realizations, he had a difficulty in going, wow, how am I going to share this with others? There's no words. Well, what can I possibly teach them? They're not capable of understanding this. Maybe I shouldn't do that. And at that moment, then a Brahmin god came down and talked to him and said, please, please, world honor one, please, try your best. You can do it. You just do it for the sake of all the suffering of all the people. You do that. The Buddha had this kind of a pause to try to figure out, not because he didn't want to do it, but he didn't know how to even begin to approach the presentation of this Dharma in a way in which it simply was just another religion, Vedic or Jainism or whatever that was happening during that time period, because it wasn't a religion. So it was difficult for him to be able to do that. This is why he explained the Four Noble Truths. But hidden within the Noble Truths, where we talk about suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path, hidden within that was this other aspect, but he did not bring that up in the beginning. He was just kind of like spoon feeding it to the world. Here's another little bit, and here's another little bit. He couldn't tell them that. It reminds me of the story that my son Ananda, when he was really young in kindergarten, and some of you have heard this, but so forgive me, but it's kind of apropos here. He would come to my classes, even he was so young, he'd come to my classes. So one day he went to the school and he was talking to the kids, and he says, you are an illusion, you don't exist, you're phenomena. And the kids they say, I do exist. No, you don't exist. And he scared them, so that the principal called me up to tell me that Ananda was scaring the students. And so when he said that, he was laughing because for the karmic forces there, he was a Buddhist himself. So he was getting the kick out of that, because here's this little person telling them this. But the students, they took it to heart, and it shocked them. So here is Shakyamuni Buddha talking to these little kids. Essentially, they're little kids. If you try to explain the essence of Buddhist to a non-Buddhist, they're frightened. And so he had to figure out a way to be able to explain this to, kind of ease them into it. So he gives them this. And then he talks about dependent origination, the 12 nidanas, and says, okay, here you are, work this out. He did not give them the answer. He just gave them the path. Work it out. This is very, very important in terms of what the Buddha was doing. He really wanted to help them, but didn't know how. But he just couldn't come up to them and say, you guys here with all this dust on your bodies, you know, you're emaciated and stuff. You don't even really exist. And what are they going to do? They're going to look at their body and do their stomach gurgling and go, what do you mean I don't exist? You know, it would have been too much of a shock to them in that time period. They would not be able to handle it. And actually quite a few people, especially if you're talking to people from a different religion, they are not able to handle even the most basic premise of that. Now, I like to put it out there, but sometimes I just like to just leave these little breadcrumbs for people to follow. This group is by and large a little bit more advanced, so I can talk in this way. If I'm talking to an introductory group, I will still talk about mine, but I will pose it as an exercise. And what if this? So all of this was coming. And then what happened? Later on, they're going, no, there is no suffering, no cause of suffering, no cessation of suffering, no path. They solved the Rubik's Cube. The Buddha gave us this Rubik's Cube to move around, boom, 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 trying to make it fit. He didn't give us the answer right directly. It was up to us to work this out. And when we began to work it out, that was when somebody went, wow, out of all of this mishmash, there's patterns. Everything fits perfectly. Again, I'm using modern day analogies, but what we're looking at is what was in the Buddha's mind at that moment as to what he was going to present. He did not present the final product. He presented the way in which one could work on it. So as it went along, it was this progression of practice that perfected our approach. We cannot say we perfected it completely because it's still via each Dharma error continues on, subject to the interpretation, subject to the cause and conditions that are presented at that time, to present it in a way in which people can at least get the Rubik's Cube to start working on. And then realizing afterwards, they're going, well, this was just a game. Yes. It is why the one master said to his students, actually, I have nothing to teach you. And the one young monk says, why am I learning from you? And he said, you're learning from me until you realize I have nothing to teach you. And it is in this way that we practice and we study. So this is very, very important in terms of what was happening doctrinally with this. And so just consider this class just an opening introduction to how Mahayana is happening. This is very, very important because if I don't give you this kind of an opening, it'll only turn into a history class or a doctrine class, but without any kind of a sense to it in terms of what was happening. So we're looking at the Heart Sutra and then beyond the Heart Sutra, but we've got to look at from where this all came from. And so to make the final tie-in with all of this is that give me 1 second to find the quote. When the Buddha was born, a week after he was born, his mother passed away. And so when she passed away, then she went to, let me see the name of the heaven, to this heaven with 33 divas. She was one of the divas. It's a Triya Trinsha, which means 33 in the Sanskrit. And so she was one of she was reborn as one of the divas there. Her name was Santu Shita. And Santu Shita, the Buddha, in accordance with his vow, went up to this heaven to teach her. And he realized that what he was teaching her, the people on earth, because of their causes and conditions, were unable to understand this. So he gave her daily a very, very complex study to her. And then at the end of the day, he would go down and speak to Sariputra and give Sariputra kind of an outline of what he talked about, and just very brief the essence of what he was talking about, which Sariputra then recorded. Sariputra then used this for the basis of the Abhidharma. So with this story in mind, that's why the Theravadins are capping. They're going, beat that. You know, we have it where it's straight from the Buddha to Sariputra, and this is an advanced system. And anybody who studied the Abhidharma, if later you have kind of an interest in this, look at the Abhidharma, just flip through it. It's not something that's a fast read. You know, it's a fast read in terms of Buddhist study. You know, I would say at least 5 years to be able to study it carefully. Okay. I mean, easily that amount of time. And to answer Angela, yeah, we'll take questions in a moment. I'm aware of the time. But that's what the Heart Sutra did, saying in the beginning, they had the Buddha talking to Sariputra. Why? Because that won up the Theravadins. Because they say, well, this was directly, he was telling him this. But it was changed to Avalokitesvara. And changing to Avalokitesvara, the essence there was that Sariputra was being directed, no, everything is empty all the way through the consciousness. Consciousness is empty. And so why is Avalokitesvara there? Because some essence of this Prajna Paramita is compassion. And that's what Avalokitesvara represented, was this compassion. So that's why Sariputra is in this one. Normally, if they were going to talk about it as being a wisdom sutra, it would be Manjusri. But the Mahayanas didn't have a bone to pick with Manjusri. He was on their side. But in the presentation of the Sariputra, and everything is real, there was the correction, everything is fundamentally empty. And this emptiness produces compassion. So I'll leave it there. And again, this is just a quick introduction to what was happening. We're going to go back and forth from history, showing how Buddhism began to develop and where it was going, up through today's understandings of that. But I think that this is an overview which enables you to get an idea of what was happening. I wish I could just condense and give you everything in one particular time, but it's not possible. So this just kind of whets your appetite to see this and to see the Heart Sutra in a different way. So I will complete the lecture now and then open it to questions.
Please use the hand button and raise your hand, or you can post your question on chat and we will unmute people. So, and then also I've posted the Monday night class information, Gilbert's Monday night class, which happens at 9:30 p.m. Eastern time. And the Zoom link is also posted. So yeah, Mei Li, please go ahead.
Oh, she's blocked out right now.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we just allow, you can unmute yourself, Mei Li.
There you go.
Okay, thank you, Gilbert. Over the years, you have taught us in a lot of sutras. And I have a simple question. I mean, from my years of learning and engagement with the teachings, I found out that I'm more attracted to the sutra that was related to Prajna teaching. However, now we have Abhidharma, and I also realized that I'm very, very, that kind of sutra was not attractive to me, but I feel that I'm not sure, should I devote time to study that now? Because if I study that now, I feel that I'm losing time to enjoy the sutra that I'm so attracted to. So I would just like to ask your opinion as when I'm in a way, I would like to just spend the time. There's one option to spend the time to the sutra that was attracted to, and on that one for maybe half a year or a few months. The other way is to allocate that time and kind of spread down, sometimes doing the sutra that I enjoy, and sometimes to read the sutra that I was unfamiliar with, but you mentioned.
You're right in the right place right now. Again, if you can study one sutra, like the Nichiren study the Lotus Sutra, and they don't go beyond that. They have no idea what other sutras are, because it is by Pulya. Nevertheless, they still can go. You know, if they studied sincerely, they can still go to the other shore, because it's a complete system. You at your level, and if you want to begin, I shouldn't say begin, if you want to continue to teach, you have to stay ahead of your students. You have to study. So what I'd suggest is you maintain your base, and you use that base, but then you spring out from there and say, well, where did this come from? And you start looking at it, and you start tying in historically the things that that led to that sutra. So that gives you an interest to expand out from there. And so as you begin to expand out, then you start seeing that there's these other sutras that are very interesting, and they have something there, or they'll lead into the Buddha's Nikayas. And then you start realizing, well, it was always there. Mahayana was always there, but you begin to get a taste of the things around you. And as you begin to study it doctrinally and historically, all of that, you're able to do that. You don't have to stay in just an isolated sutra where you feel comfortable. What you want to do is you're like in the Tathagata Garba, you're the embryo there, but you haven't expanded out and embraced the Dharma. Now, embracing the Dharma, it's as if you were kind of in the well, like the proverbial frog. You know, if you jump out of the well and you look around, it's like your head could explode, because you don't know even where to begin to study. But let your heart do that. Let your heart direct you in a certain way. And what I do, and I mentioned it to people many times, is I will take something, you know, out of Wikipedia, for instance, and I will study it, and then it will present to me a kind of a general overview. But within that, there are there are hotkeys that you press and it will take you to whatever you want to study. So I work out from there. So when I do that, you know, and I look at it and it talks about Salisamba Sutra, lo and behold, then I get to the text of the Salisamba Sutra, and I'm able to see that and read that. And so I don't use Wikipedia just simply to study from, but to move out from. And it gives me a base where I can do a search and say, okay, well, this, I don't know what this word means. And so when I don't know the word, then I'll push on the key and then it will tell me a definition of the word. So it's a way of studying where you kind of hang on to a base, but you can move out from there and begin to, you just run into so many sutras. That's how I know the sutras, because I'm looking at them going, oh, this one's connected here. And when I'm within that sutra or something from Wikipedia, then I will do something else. I remember once I was teaching, and one of my students saw that I was teaching the Abhidharma, and I had a Wikipedia. No, I know what it was, Yogacara, and I had a Wikipedia note, and he was saying, "You're teaching us from Wikipedia?" I go, "No, I'm only teaching you from Wikipedia because you cannot understand the Yogacara. You know, if I could tell you that, I'm like teaching you the Four Noble Truths in basic, because you could not possibly understand the Yogacara." So the next week I brought back a book about this big and about this thick in very small print on the Yogacara and said, "Read this." So he took it and he brought it back in a week, and he just was like shaking his head, because then he understood how in depth it was and what I was doing to try to introduce certain topics to them and to say things, because Wikipedia is kind of like the Four Noble Truths, the first Four Noble Truths. You know, it kind of presents that. Sometimes it'll go in deeper, but it's you that you have to look at the source material to be able to do that. So this is what I'd strongly recommend, but you still study your sutra, because no matter what, that's Vaipulya. It is also a source that has within it a perfect system to understand Buddha Dharma. So if you want to stay there, that's fine. But I think for you, it would be very beneficial for you just to branch out and then start looking at this stuff. And then you'll see it's very, very interesting. You know, you can Wikipedia Mahayana and then see where it is. And as you begin to do this, then it will work for you. Okay, try that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So Michelle was asking if there's any material for us to prepare to have a reference for Monday's class.
For tomorrow, you mean?
Yes.
Or next Sunday? No,
Monday.
No, I haven't. As soon as I finish this one, then I'll develop. I'm not sure where I'm going to go, because I just finished with one, and I concentrated everything on this. If I do something, I'll probably post it, but I haven't really yet come up with which way I'm going to go. I've got like certain things kind of in the hopper, but I don't have anything in particular what I'm going to do. When I do that, then I begin to post. But yes, that's always helpful if you come to the classes prepared, because then it is something that will be beneficial. So if you study for this class, let's say the Heart Sutra, that's quite beneficial from it. The thing with the Heart Sutra is very interesting, is because there's so many interpretations of it. And even back in the older days, there was interpretations of the Heart Sutra and 150 CE, 200, and I think 467 CE. There was different people interpreting it, and then there's so many versions of it now. You have to kind of really look at all the versions and find one that kind of fits with it, because everyone has the Heart Sutra, but actually there's so many different compilations of it and things. It's difficult, but what we're doing is we're studying the heart of it, so it's not so bad. Okay, But on the Monday night classes, I begin to develop my topic. I will let you guys know.
So next question is from Robert. Is transcendence similar to decondition?
Did he say deconditioned?
Yeah. Is transcendent similar to deconditioned?
No. By virtue of the question, it's clear.
Okay.
There's no conditioning or unconditioned in the mind ultimately. So we don't see things in that way, but we do talk about it on this side about that. So that's why I'm trying to get Robert to jump into the rabbit hole, which he doesn't quite want to go yet. But if you jump in, then the answer is self-evident.
He also asked, is it all just a game similar to Stop Seeking?
No, it's a matter of life and death. It's you could see that as a game as you begin to practice, and you're sitting to meditate and you see thoughts arising like a cat and mouse game, but ultimately it determines, quite a bit in terms of if there's a transcendence, one is not worrying about life and death. One just realizes, hey, this is a Monopoly game or a game of life, let's say, and I can see where it's all going to, and there's certain things when you roll the dice, but the dice that are rolled here are karmically weighted. So one begins to see that it's karmically weighted. If you have a bad fortune, it's going to put you on to places where you're in debt or pay this money or whatever, but to see that is very, very important. Okay.
And Esther is asking, what is life in the being?
Life in being?
Yeah.
A life in being, and this is kind of something that, and I might post it. There was a question from the interpreter group I use ego, personality, life in being, which is a quote from the Diamond Sutra, and they had brought up an alternative interpretation where it said life and being. There is no life and being, but in the interpretation that or translation I'd received, they lumped those together to say life in being, which to me makes the same thing. It is just that there is no Esther. Esther is a dream. There is no being of Esther. There is no being of a transmutation of a soul, which is very important. There's no ego, personality. There's no soul there that's muted into something else. It's just simply all of those notions, which are conditioned, are merged into the unconditioned, which is mind.
And from Nicholas, I think you've mentioned to stop seeking before, or maybe I heard it from somewhere else. But then what is the point of setting goals if we do not seek to achieve them?
It's kind of like when we talk about this and say, don't think. When we sit on the meditation cushion, we should not think. We should not engage in some kind of a linear thought process. When we're up and about, we should also want to sever this mind that desires continuation. As we're up and about, we're engaged in everything. Just like Huineng said, he has thousands of thoughts a day, but actually the manner in which he was saying this was an expression of what's called in Chinese wu nian, meaning no thought. But no thought doesn't mean that one doesn't think. It is that one does not attach to the thought and does not create thoughts from thoughts that are appearing. One is spontaneous. The mind is spontaneous in the moment, and uses this inherent wisdom to respond to what is appearing in the mind ground, and using that is what we call Wu Nian. So there's no thought, there's no Gilbert that is making an evaluation. And thank you, Angela. So don't think it like no thought means that there's no thought, because then essentially everybody would stop right now wherever they were in the world, not be able to move a step forward. But it is the idea of not clinging to thought. Okay.
Okay, next question is from Ron. Mind is unmoved yet reflected all. Isn't the use of true mind is in fact demonstrated in the illusion, reflection, and salvation of endless illusion?
Well, in this way, all of these things are there. I don't necessarily think there's an endless illusion. I think there's infinite mind, an infinite light of mind, but it is not necessarily an endless illusion. Otherwise, then we would be playing a game that cannot be solved. To a certain extent, it is in this way that we as individuals cannot solve it. It is something that mind reckons with mind. But when we look at this, it is important for us to see, even though we ourselves are an impression on the mirror mind, we need to be able to practice so that to be able to allow this transcendence, so that when the suffering stops, then the mind is clear, and it is no longer the life and being that is making the selections, but one is using their inherent wisdom to make decisions. And then there's although we see everything as an illusion, we do not see this we're aware of, let's say, the fundamental illusion, which is ignorance of that there is a life and being. Once we're able to see that, then everything else just naturally fits right perfectly in its place. But we still have to study. It's not something that is bestowed upon us. If it was bestowed upon us, I would only have to have one class, and it would be like, have you seen Gilbert's CD? No. If you see it, you will change, and everybody would who saw that would be able to transcend this elusive reality. I think they made a movie of it, but it was a spooky movie where the people watched it, and then some ghost came out of their TV. So that cannot work that way. We have to see the things clearly, understand who is thinking, who asked the question, and that's very important. Okay. No more questions? Okay. I hope you enjoyed this kind of a thing. Some of it was basic, some of it is very, very deep, some of it is historical. So I think that this is something that is quite beneficial to you, irregardless of what level you are. So please come back next week. Tell your friends. I'm passing out the Enlightenment CD for everybody. Okay.
Great. Thank you so much, Gilbert.
Thank you, Gilbert.
Bow.
Join palm and bow, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gilbert.
Thank you,
You're
Gilbert.
welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you, Angela.
Thank you, Gilbert.
Gilbert.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Gilbert.
Thank you, Gilbert.
I'm getting through everybody. Thank you. Hello, Miranda. Yes. Okay. Bye-bye.